Prince Louis had always been full of laughter. The cheeky little prince who could light up any room. Suddenly, the sparkle in his eyes began to fade. Why had he stopped smiling? Why was he refusing meals and hiding his usual mischief? William first noticed the change after Catherine's illness. But even after her recovery, Louis remained unusually quiet. However, when Louise passed out one morning, it ignited a strange fear in them. Could it be another diagnosis awaiting them? Was he hiding a deeper fear? Or was something more heartbreaking unfolding behind those young eyes? The joyful prince. The morning sunshine poured through the tall windows of Adelaide Cottage as Prince Louis raced down the hallway, his laughter echoing off ancient walls. At just 6 years old, the youngest child of Prince William and Princess Catherine had already earned himself a special reputation within the royal family. He was the one who could make even the most serious moments dissolve into giggles. The child whose sparkling eyes and mischievous grin could soften any stern face. During breakfast one particular morning, Louis had climbed onto his chair and announced with absolute confidence that he would become a dinosaur expert when he grew up. His older brother George had rolled his eyes while Princess Charlotte tried to hide her smile behind her juice glass. Their mother had simply reached over and ruffled his hair, whispering something that made him beam with pride. These were the ordinary moments that filled their home with warmth, the simple exchanges that created the fabric of their family life. The palace staff adored him completely. Kitchen workers often found themselves sneaking extra biscuits into his lunchbox, knowing that his genuine thank you so much would make their entire day brighter. Gardeners working on the grounds would look up to find Louis watching them with fascination, asking endless questions about every flower and insect he spotted. One elderly gardener later remembered how the young prince had carefully picked a dandelion and presented it as though it were the rarest treasure. "This is for you because you work so hard," Louis had said with complete sincerity. Public appearances revealed his natural charm to the world beyond palace walls. During one notable carriage procession, Louis had waved so enthusiastically that his hand became a blur of motion, delighting everyone who witnessed his unbridled excitement. At another event, he had stuck his tongue out playfully, earning gentle correction from his mother, but also capturing hearts with his unfiltered spontaneity. Unlike children raised to constant formality, Louis possessed an authentic spirit that refused to be completely contained by royal protocol. His relationship with his siblings showed a different side of his personality. Charlotte had discovered that her little brother made an excellent partner for imaginative games, willing to play any role she assigned him without complaint. Whether he was a knight defending a castle or a patient in her pretend hospital, Louis threw himself into each character with complete dedication. George, though sometimes exasperated by his younger brother's energy, secretly enjoyed teaching Louis about football and watching his determination to master every skill. "You have to kick harder," George would instruct, and Louis would nod seriously before attempting another goal with fierce concentration. Catherine often spoke privately about how Louis brought unexpected joy into difficult moments. When schedules became overwhelming or responsibilities felt heavy, his sudden appearance in her office would shift everything. He would climb onto her lap without invitation, settling there as though he belonged nowhere else in the world. "Mommy, can we go feed the ducks?" he might ask, completely unaware of meetings waiting or duties demanding attention. Those interruptions became precious reminders of what truly mattered. William had his own special bond with his youngest son. Evening routines included rough and tumble play that left both of them breathless with laughter. Louis would launch himself at his father with complete trust, knowing those strong arms would always catch him. During quieter moments, they would sit together looking at books about animals or adventures with Louis asking questions that revealed his curious mind. Why do elephants have such long noses? Or can dragons be friendly? These conversations reminded William of innocence worth protecting. The household staff often exchanged knowing glances when Louis appeared, anticipating whatever delightful chaos might follow. He had once convinced a visiting dignitary to participate in an impromptu race across the garden. Another time he had organized all his stuffed animals into what he called a very important meeting and invited his grandfather to attend as a special guest. These moments of pure childhood magic made him beloved by everyone who knew him. Nobody could have imagined that such brightness would soon face shadows beyond anything a child should endure. The first signs of change. Something shifted in the Adelaide Cottage household during late winter. Though nobody could pinpoint exactly when it began. Lizzie stopped racing through the hallways with his usual abandon. The echoes of laughter that once bounced off the walls grew quieter, then disappeared altogether. Catherine noticed at first during breakfast one gray morning when Louis barely touched his favorite pancakes, pushing them around his plate with distant eyes. William sat across the table watching his youngest son with growing concern. The boy who normally chatted endlessly about his dreams and plans now sat in silence staring at nothing in particular. "Lise darling, are you feeling all right?" Catherine asked gently, reaching across to touch his forehead. He nodded without meeting her eyes and mumbled something about not being hungry. She exchanged a worried glance with William, but neither voiced the fear creeping into their thoughts. The changes came gradually, like seasons shifting without announcement. Charlotte tried pulling her little brother into their favorite games, setting up elaborate scenarios with all his beloved toys arranged just the way he liked. "Come on, Louis, you have to be the dragon this time," she insisted, tugging at his sleeve. He looked at the toys with an expression that seemed almost confused, as though he had forgotten how to play. "Maybe later," he whispered, turning away to curl up on the window seat instead. George attempted his own approach, bringing out the football and demonstrating new tricks he had learned. "Watch this, Louis. I can teach you," he called enthusiastically, hoping to spark some of that fierce determination his brother always showed. But Lizzie simply shook his head and walked back inside, leaving George standing alone in the garden with the ball at his feet. The older boy stood there for several long minutes, unable to understand what had changed. William attributed these transformations to the enormous weight pressing down on their family. Catherine's cancer diagnosis had shattered their world into pieces, and he assumed his sensitive youngest child was simply struggling to process such frightening news. "He is just worried about his mother," William explained to concerned staff members who mentioned Louis's unusual quietness. "He needs time to adjust to everything happening around us." It seemed like a reasonable explanation, one that made sense given the circumstances they faced. Meal times became particularly troubling. The boy who once asked for second helpings now barely finished half of what sat before him. Cook prepared his favorite dishes, hoping to tempt his appetite back, but plates returned to the kitchen nearly untouched. The young prince hardly ate anything again, she reported with increasing worry, noting how his clothes seemed to hang looser on his small frame. Palace staff began whispering among themselves about the changes they witnessed. The gardener who once received dandelion gifts now worked his flower beds alone without curious questions or fascinated observations. Housekeepers found Louis sitting motionless in corners, staring at walls with an expression they could not read. One maid later recalled finding him standing perfectly still in the library, tears running silently down his cheeks. "Are you hurt, Your Highness?" she had asked with alarm. He had simply wiped his face and walked away without answering. Catherine held Lizzie close during bedtime routines, stroking his hair and singing soft lullabies as she had done since infancy. She felt his small body rigid against hers, lacking the relaxed warmth of a contented child. "Tell Mommy what is bothering you," she whispered into the darkness. "Everything is fine," came his automatic reply, spoken in a voice that carried no conviction whatsoever. William stood outside the bedroom door one evening, listening to those whispered exchanges, and felt cold fear settle in his chest. This was more than sadness or stress. Something had stolen the light from his son's eyes, and he could not identify what monster lurked behind this terrible change. Lingering concern posteriori. Spring arrived with promising warmth, painting the gardens in brilliant colors that should have lifted every heart. Catherine stood at the window watching new flowers bloom, grateful beyond words for her recovery. The cancer battle had ended victoriously, and doctors assured her the worst had passed. Yet even as relief flooded through the household, one shadow refused to lift. Louis remained trapped in his quiet world, unreachable. Despite all their efforts to bring him back, Charlotte organized a special tea party in the garden, arranging everything exactly how Louis used to enjoy it. She set out his favorite stuffed animals in careful positions, poured pretend tea into tiny cups, and baked biscuit crumbs she called magical cookies. "Louis, please come," she begged, standing at his bedroom door with hopeful eyes. "Everyone is waiting for you, and the dragon said he misses you terribly," but Louis simply turned over in his bed, facing the wall. Charlotte stood there feeling helpless, unable to understand why her brother would not return to her. George tried different tactics, appealing to the competitive spirit that once burned so brightly in his younger brother. He challenged Louis to races across the lawn, offered to let him win at cards, even suggested they build the biggest fort ever constructed in their playroom. "We could make it reach the ceiling," George proposed with genuine excitement, hoping to spark some interest. Louis looked at him with tired eyes and shook his head. "I do not want to," he said quietly, and George felt something crack inside his chest. William spent countless hours trying to coax explanations from his youngest son. He sat on the floor of Louise's room, attempting casual conversations about anything that might open a door between them. Remember when we saw those elephants at the zoo? He asked, recalling a day when Louis had talked about nothing else for weeks afterward. You said you wanted to learn everything about them. Louis picked at the carpet threads, offering only silence in response. William watched him carefully, searching for clues in every gesture and expression. Catherine approached the situation with gentle persistence, inviting Louises to help her with small tasks around the house. Would you like to choose flowers for the dining table? She asked one morning, remembering how he once loved arranging blooms in vases. Louis followed her to the garden, but stood motionless among the roses, making no move to pick anything. She knelt beside him, cupping his small face in her hands. Darling, Mommy is better now, she whispered. You do not need to worry anymore. His eyes filled with tears. He refused to let fall and he pulled away from her touch. Nighttime became particularly difficult for everyone. Louis's sleep grew restless, plagued by dreams that left him crying out in the darkness. William or Catherine would rush to his bedside, finding him tangled in sweaty sheets, trembling and disoriented. What frightened you, sweetheart? Catherine asked during one such episode, holding him against her heart. I cannot remember, Louis replied, though his terrified expression suggested otherwise. These episodes happened with increasing frequency, stealing rest from the entire household. The couple lay awake in their own bed night after night, discussing their growing fears in hushed voices. This is not normal sadness, Catherine admitted, voicing what both had been thinking. Something more is happening inside him. Something we cannot see. William agreed, feeling utterly powerless against an enemy he could not identify or fight. They had faced cancer together, endured that terrible battle, but this invisible struggle consuming their son felt somehow worse because they had no weapons against it. Staff members continued reporting worrying observations. Louis no longer responded to jokes or kind words. His appetite remained poor despite Cook's creative attempts to tempt him with special treats. The household that had once revolved partly around his infectious energy now moved around his quiet presence like water flowing past a stone. Everyone felt the wrongness of it. The unnatural silence where joyful noise should exist. George found Charlotte crying in the hallway one afternoon. He does not want to play with me anymore. She sobbed. Does Louis not love us now? George wrapped his arms around his sister, having no answers to offer. They both felt abandoned by the brother who had once been their constant companion and closest friend. However, what awaited them would soon leave the palace in a state of panic. The crisis, a morning of panic. The dawn broke cold and gray on a Tuesday morning that would change everything. Catherine walked into Louis's bedroom to wake him for breakfast and immediately knew something was terribly wrong. His small body lay curled beneath the blankets, shivering despite the warmth of the room. She touched his forehead and jerked her hand back from the burning heat radiating from his skin. William, she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. William, come quickly. Within seconds, William stood beside the bed, his face draining of color as he looked down at their son. Louis' eyes were half open but unfocused, his breathing shallow and rapid. Sweat dampened his hair, making it stick to his flushed cheeks. Louis, can you hear me? William asked, urgently, gently shaking the boy's shoulder.